Good evening, everyone. It is your girl, Marcy Thomas, and I am back with you for another episode of the BGC Book Club. It's been a while since I've seen you all. Actually, I was out last week, so it's such a pleasure to be back to be able to have a great conversation with you yet again about a really spectacular book that I can't wait to get into. So please come on in the room so that we can have this great conversation and also get a chance to talk to a guest that we've had the pleasure of talking to before. So if you're new here for the first time, I am coming to you live from the outskirts of Atlanta, Georgia, originally from Cleveland, Ohio, with a little bit of Detroit, which our guest is originally from as well, and a few other places in between. So come on in the room, let us know where you're joining us from. And again, let's get ready to have a really wonderful and powerful conversation. So I am excited to have with us for the second time Bridgett M. Davis, who is the author of the memoir, The World According to Fannie Davis, who was her mother. And that's My Mother's Life in the Detroit Numbers, which was a New York Times Editor's Choice, named the best book of 2019 by Kirkus Reviews, and featured as a clue on Jeopardy. Imagine that. She is the author of 2 novels, Into the Go Slow and Shifting Through Neutral. She is also the writer and director of the award-winning Naked Acts, which is getting a recent resurgence and being shown in film festivals and all those sorts of things. So we're going to talk about that a little bit as well. She is a professor emerita at Baruch College of the City of New York and the Graduate Center, where she taught creative, narrative, and film writing. And she is a graduate of Spelman College and Columbia Journalism School and lives in Brooklyn with her family. So without any further delay, let's welcome Bridgett M. Davis to talk about her latest, Love, Rita. Come on in the room. Yes.
Hello.
Welcome. Hello. It's such a pleasure to have you back again.
It's great to be back.
Yes, and I wasn't realizing 2019, that was a while ago that we talked.
It's amazing that 6 years can go by like that.
Yes.
Yeah,
It's been quite a while. So you have been busy in that time frame.
I have, yes.
You have been busy. And so we just recently have gotten Love, Rita, which is a beautiful book. First of all, let's talk about that photo on the cover.
Yeah, I love the cover. I really do. Yeah.
Yes. You and your sister. I know sometimes the light's a little off, but yes, that's such a beautiful cover and a beautiful story for those who haven't had a chance to read it yet. But it is your memoir. It's part 2, I guess, of the memoir. Yeah. So after having The World According to Fannie Davis out in the world, which to all this critical acclaim, what was it that made you want to tell your sister's story?
You know, Marcy, I thought I was only going to tell one story because in The World According to Fannie Davis, I talk about my sister Rita a lot. It was impossible to tell my mom's story without talking about her because they were very close, and she was so helpful to my mom in helping to run her numbers business, actually. Right. But what happened was that I decided to write my sister a letter on what would have been her 65th birthday. And as I was writing this letter, I literally said, I still don't know why you're not here with me. And so many emotions came back, like physically, I felt it. And I realized, oh, I'm not over this. I'm not done processing it. I'm still grieving. And for me, writing is always the way through and the way to healing. So I decided, you know what? I've always wanted to write about her. I think I actually need to. And so I started the journey.
Yes, and it's a beautiful journey through a lot of ups and downs, and because one of the tagline is an American story of sisterhood, joy, loss, and legacy. And we see all of those things in this story. Yeah. So I can imagine that it wasn't an easy journey to relive or recapture a lot of the things that you talk about in the book.
It was hard. I'll be really honest with you. And the way I was able to do it was I told myself, I'll write the easy parts first.
Okay.
Yeah. I have never had to say that to myself, but with this book I did. And so I really enjoyed remembering and writing about the good times that my sister Rita and I had, and that was fun. like
Yes.
reminiscing and getting back in that like memory space. And really what it did was it gave me a chance to be in a relationship with her again. So often someone dies, and when they pass, it's not as though your love stops.
Right.
And some people say that grief really is love with nowhere to go.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, you know, wow, look at this. I'm feeling like I'm in a relationship with her again, and I'm actually getting to know new things about her, and I am living with her again. Because that's
Mm-hmm.
what happens when you're writing about someone. So those were the good things about it, and that's what made it so worth the process once I got to the hard parts. And I did. I did.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I love that you said that, that grief. Say that again about what grief is.
They say that grief is really love with nowhere to go.
Yes, I can agree with that. 'Cause as I mentioned to you, before we came on, that I lost my father 7 years ago,
Yeah.
and so it's one of those things that comes up, and you never know when it's going to come up. You never know how it's going to hit, because there
Yeah.
is that love didn't pass just because he did.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
so, and honestly, well, you already know. Well, you didn't know until tonight that I have a Detroit connection. So really reading your book, not only was I really engaged with the story and the
Mm.
continuation of your family story, but it also brought up a lot of good memories for me of spending
Sure.
time in Detroit, because that's where
Mhm.
my dad was for
Yeah.
several years of his life.
Yeah.
So I'm like,
I'll
okay,
bet you recognized a lot of places.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. You were talking about the malls and some of the stores and stuff like that. Yeah, I remember. I remember shopping there, or
Yeah.
going to that mall and things like that. So
Yeah.
there's a question, Felice. Have we discussed the first book here? Yes, we have, and I will definitely share the replay link so you can go and check out when we talked about The World According to Fannie Davis. We didn't realize how long it had been, but it's been a while.
Yeah.
It's still out there though. So I want to start off by giving you an opportunity just to share what you said you wanted to share in the book, just so we can see what the story is about, and then we can get
Yeah.
into the
I would
questions.
love to do that. I have a preface. The book
Yeah.
starts with about a 5-minute introduction. So I wanted to read that. Is that
Yes.
good?
And then we can get into the questions. So
All right.
you're gonna be on the screen by yourself, so just be aware.
Okay. All right, here we go.
All
So
right.
love, Rita. This is the preface. Rita and I grew up in a house of numbers. Because our mother was a number runner, numbers were many things: the name of the game that she ran, the digits that became lottery style winners, the dollar amounts of the money she made or paid out, the digit based interpretation of the people, places, and things we all dreamed about at night. Numbers out in the world took on special meaning, as any combination of them could become gifts from the universe, translated into a bet played and a win. Pythagoras, the famous Greek mathematician from 550 BC, is attributed with saying, "The world is built upon the power of numbers." Rita and I believed in that power. And while we were not active devotees to the ancient science of numerology, we de facto practiced it by paying attention to the numbers in our lives. We understood intuitively that numbers contain energy, and if we let them, they provide insight. One day, she and I sat down with our mother and figured out our own personal numbers. The numbers that followed us around, that revealed themselves as patterns in our lives. Mama's number was 9. My number was 7. And Rita's number was 4. She had triple proof of this from birth. She was the fourth child, born in the fourth month, with 4 letters in her name. Also, in numerology, every name has a vibratory number obtained by translating the letters of a person's name into figures, then adding their totals and reducing them to primary numbers. Based on this calculation and her signature, Rita R. Davis, my sister's name number was also 4. Fours continued to follow Rita throughout her life. She had 4 best friends and 4 good years in her beloved downtown apartment with its views of the Detroit River. She retired at age 40, and she lived to be 44. Our relationship as sisters has been shaped by the number 4 in profound ways. We were 4 years apart in age, i.e., she was 4 when I was born, her baby sister, and she was in my life for 40 years. The power of Rita's personal number follows me into the writing of this book. I completed my memoir of her when Rita would have been 67. 6 plus 7 equals 13. 1 plus 3 equals 4. That would have been a 4-year for her. Also, 4 years after I committed to writing this book, it's out in the world. According to the complete illustrated book of the psychic sciences, which sat on the bookshelf of our childhood home, the number 4 stands for steadiness, dependability, and endurance. Its solidity is represented by the square, the points of the compass, the seasons of the year, and the ancient elements of fire, water, air, and earth. 4 is foundational in the world. Rita was foundational to me. I have organized this book around my sister's personal number by dividing the narrative into 44 chapters in honor of her years on earth. I have further divided those chapters into 4 parts to represent the 4 phases of her life, or rather, because I love the metaphor of Rita's time on earth as a complex symphony, the 4 movements of her life. In an important aside, 22 is a master number in numerology, which is powerful on its own, but also in its primary form breaks down to the number 4. After our first familial loss with the death of our father, and as the subsequent losses of loved ones kept coming, Rita and I were the constant family member in each other's lives for 22 years. Across the expanse of those years, Rita wrote 22 letters to me. I have saved each one, and those letters have inspired Love Rita. This is the story of Rita and of us, told in 4s.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing, because it just means a lot. And as you all read the book, because I know you're going to read the book, you will really get to see how that all plays out. And using the number, and because like a lot of times I wake up at 444 like Jay-Z.
Right?
Just things like that. And as I mentioned to you before, my father, who was in Detroit, he loved to play the numbers. So like there's certain numbers that I always think of. I think of him in that. So I love that you shared that, and just the significance of what that means for you. Mm-hmm. But this story is rich, because it's about Rita. It's also about just your family in general, but it's like she is the centerpiece of this story, which makes sense, because she would have been the sibling that you would have been closest to in age, and the things that you went through together and experiencing life together. But what's interesting, though, it wasn't always good, and you don't shy away from that in this book. Matter of fact, very early on, Rita was like, "What's up with this?"
Right. Yeah, I was just determined to be honest. And,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of things were going on for me with that. First, I did want to figure out what was really at the heart of that rivalry for us.
Right.
Because even though people would say, oh, your sister's jealous of you, I never felt it.
Mm.
I never felt the jealousy. I only felt her support or her love, and that she was bossy
Mm-hmm.
also, that too. But I thought, maybe what's happening here is that there's so little in popular culture about sisterhood,
Mm-hmm.
and especially the special bond between Black sisters,
Right.
right? Like you see stories, but in my opinion, they're often superficial and they
Mm-hmm.
don't show the complexity. They don't show, the fact that there are highs and lows and the love remains throughout. And so I wanted to capture a real sisterhood. That was what I was going for. And I thought, well, just be honest about that relationship, just be
Mm-hmm.
honest.
Yes, and it makes sense because even how Rita came into the world,
Mhm.
it's like she automatically had this bond with your mother. And
Yes.
I'll let you talk about that. I don't want to tell your story for you, but that's just
Yeah.
the bond that she had with your mother, Fanny. And then here you come. It's like, wait a minute, there's somebody else that's going to, kind of take some of my attention and things like that. And I mean, that's kind of normal in most families. That
Yeah, but I was saying in the book that I really believe every child is born into a different family.
right.
And so there was one dynamic when she was the baby, and things had changed drastically in the 4 years between when she came along and I did. And
Mm-hmm.
I am now able to look back and see how the dynamics of the household affected our relationship, basically, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so that felt really important to me to really look at what's going on in a family when someone comes into that family and how does it shift the dynamics, like move the particles and the molecules in the air. And
Mm-hmm.
also just in terms of Black life,
Yes.
right? I felt too was important to appreciate that my mom struggled with that delivery when Rita was born. And it had
Yes.
a lot to do with the fact that she was, my mom, at that point in her life, struggling and impoverished. They had
Mm-hmm.
recently migrated north and they had not gotten a foothold. And that had to play a part in the delivery and in the riskiness of that birth and the fact that they almost didn't make it. And as you said, yes, I think it created a special bond between them. But it also speaks to the way Black women are treated in the medical,
Mm-hmm.
profession, treated by the medical industry. It really speaks to what we survive and
Yes.
yet what we suffer despite surviving. So it was a way for me to kind of look at all of those factors that affect Black life while telling this very personal story of my own, sister and how she came into the world.
Yes, because in our families, you're right. There can be different situations where, because I'm thinking like my mom and her sister, they're several years apart. So yes, how my mother was brought up, or things that were happening when my mother came along, it was different when her
Very
younger sister
different.
came around like 9 years later. Things were
Yeah.
very, very different. And
Hmm.
just the fact that you're telling your personal story, but within telling your story, it's the story of things that were happening in Detroit. It's the
Yes.
story of things that were happening in the world around you. Because
Hmm.
kind of how I'm feeling, like how we are now, we all have our own interpersonal things, but there's a whole lot of stuff going on in the world around us that has an impact on how we live from day to day.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I began to realize when I look back that Rita lived through the entire second half of the 20th century. And
Mm-hmm.
so her life was really uh, symbolic of a lot that was happening in the culture, whether it was the effects of Reaganomics, whether it was, for instance, in her case, being on the front line, that first group of Blacks who got uh, corporate jobs and entered that corporate dynamic for the first time. And trust me, because they were first, they had to suffer the slings and arrows of the resentment that came with that. And so I thought, wow, this is a way of telling a piece of American history too.
Yes.
You know, I mean, I will share this one sad anecdote. When my mom was pregnant with Rita, Emmett Till was murdered. And my mom told the story that she saw that image in Jet magazine and she almost had a miscarriage. And so I began to do the research and, really try to understand what is that kind of trauma doing to the fetus. And so how did she start in the world, my sister? How much stress was there already, like literally surrounding her when she was born? And I guess it's because I was trying to answer an unanswerable question.
Yes.
My sister suffered from lupus. And she was diagnosed with it when she was 20. And I wanted to know why. Why Rita? And why didn't she survive it? These are unanswerable questions. But I'm an interrogator, I have a background in journalism. And so for me, it was an opportunity to try to answer it. Well, let's just look at all the factors, starting with her actual conception and birth. Yeah.
Yes, and because it is true, they say that things are absorbed through the fetus, but then not just in that one situation. We as a people, we carry things from generations and generations and generations.
Inherited trauma is real.
Inherited trauma is real. It is a real thing. Why we might be in certain situations and automatically feel uneasy, even if we've never been in that situation before, but it's something.
It's like your body remembers
that we just know or feel or experience because it's happening.
Yeah, they say the body keeps the score. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So.
Yes.
So yeah, and so then I was thinking, all right, well, I think it's important to really show whenever I'm writing anything, whether it's a novel, a memoir, my film that I wrote and directed, I'm always trying to portray Black humanity.
Yes.
In all its complexity, because I feel that that's something that we haven't had the opportunity to really have in its variety. I mean, we have a lot more today than we used to, for sure.
Yes.
But I am just always interested in the specificity of someone's life, a Black person's life. And so in this case, with my sister Rita, I wanted to really show the ways in which she enjoyed her life.
Yes.
That you are not just how you died, you are really more about how you lived. That's what defines you. And that's what I wanted people to know about her. Not just that her life was cut short, but that rich life she lived in the time she was here.
Right. And she did live a rich life. I mean, even starting as a young person, I mean, I guess there are pros and cons, but she was extremely smart.
Yes.
So the fact that she had the opportunity to skip grades,
yes,
and things like that as a young person, like I said, there's pros and cons to that. Of course, we now know.
Yes.
But just the fact that she was not someone who, wasn't intelligent or wasn't popular or all these different things. She was living quite a full life and having relationships and going to college and learning and exploring how she wanted to live out the rest of her life. Because as you said, she was 20. So she had already, begun the process of becoming the woman that she wanted to be, and then was diagnosed with lupus.
Right. She graduated from college at 20. Yeah. And so she was diagnosed right around the time that she graduated. And, one of the great pleasures for me, it was to do for this memoir exactly what I also did for The World According to Fannie Davis. I talked to a lot of people.
Yes.
That knew her. I talked to about 20 different people who knew Rita in different capacities. Because here's the thing, I knew her as my sister, right? And that's one perspective, believe me. And so to hear her friends talk about her, to hear her grad school buddies tell me things about her, to hear her ex-boyfriends talk to me about her, former lovers, people
Mhm.
she worked with, colleagues. It was so incredible because, yes, I learned things I didn't know. But I think what happened was I just got to know her better. And that made me admire her more.
Mhm.
And that,
Yes,
you know, yeah.
she definitely had. I was enjoying learning about her,
Mm,
and reading the book just to see how she made decisions about what she wanted to do, and she pivoted when she had to pivot and all those sorts of things. But going to Fisk,
yeah.
and how that was a big deal for her to leave Detroit and to go to Fisk and be there with family, that
Mhm,
extended family, since that's where your parents were originally
mhm.
living prior to
Right,
going to Detroit.
right.
But the relationships that she built there. But I also like the fact that she was like no nonsense. She didn't suffer any fools.
Mm-mm.
She
And that
didn't
was one thing about her.
like, she didn't like automatically like everybody. So for her
Mm-mm.
to like really engage with people, she had to feel that like they were a safe space for her.
For sure, for sure. She had a lot of wisdom too.
Mm-hmm.
And she had qualities that I always admired. And I sometimes envied her, to be honest, because she was more personable and she made friends easily and people adored her instantly. And she had a kind of radiance and a style about her that attracted people. She was that person who, when she walked in a room, heads did turn. And at the same time, she was so down to earth and so
Mm-hmm.
approachable. And so there were these ways that she moved through the world that I totally admired and looked up to. So, in that regard, she was such a big sister because she influenced me in so many ways. She gave me a model for how to live life boldly.
Yes.
You know, that's
Yeah.
what it was. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. Well, one thing that was interesting, though, she was not the oldest child, but a lot of her mannerisms and behavior, you would have thought that she was,
Mm-hmm.
because
Mm-hmm.
she was like the mother hen that worried about everybody and wanted to know what was going on. Like, I know there was an instance where you mentioned you were walking to school, and she's like, "Well, who are you walking to school?" These sorts of things.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I found that interesting.
She was definitely my big sister.
Mm,
Like we had three siblings older than us, but it was maybe because they were, some years apart in age, whereas she and I were just 4 years apart. But she and my older sister were more years apart than that.
mhm.
And so maybe we were the closest in age. I think that had something to do with it. But also, the book contains a lot of the letters that she wrote to me. And the
Mhm.
first letter she wrote, as you were pointing out, she was at college writing me saying, "Tell me who you're walking to school with, because if you're leaving early in the morning, I don't want you walking by yourself."
Right.
And I thought, when I look back on that, all these years later, I'm like, such caretaking, such
Mhm.
caretaking. I mean, a young woman at college, you wouldn't expect her to be thinking about that,
Right.
but
Just to
she
be off
was.
living her, just to be off living her life. Um,
Exactly.
but how much of that do you think had to do with just the closeness to your mother, and because your mother was, had the numbers business, there was a level of tension that was always surrounding that, and it just looked like Rita really carried a lot of that within herself as well.
I think she definitely was the what we used to call the nervous child, but now we would say she had anxiety. And I
Mm.
do think the numbers business was a stressful environment for her. Not that we felt unsafe most of the time. It wasn't that. But of
Right.
course, it was an illegal business and it involved gambling. And that meant that, there were times that my mom was doing well and there were times that she wasn't, based on whether her customers are winning or not. So
Right.
that can be a stressful dynamic to live around. But mostly, I think it was Rita's natural instinct to want to protect others and to make sure her mom, our mother, was okay. That meant everything to her.
Mhm. Mhm.
Also, I feel as though, again, that idea that every child's born into a different family. When I started writing the book, I had to shift my focus. I thought, for instance, okay, when our parents divorced, I had one experience of that because I was 8 years old.
Right.
But then I started thinking, what did that mean for Rita, 12 years old, about to enter high school, going into puberty? It was a different experience for her. And sometimes we as siblings are locked into our own experience.
Right.
We think it's the universal one, you know. And I thought, oh, this was important for me to imagine what that was like for her,
Mm-hmm.
you know. Yeah.
It definitely would have been a different experience for her, having more years of being, in the family as it stood,
Mm-hmm.
and going through a lot of changes in her own life, because at this point she's already experienced going, starting a period, she's
Mm-hmm.
going into high school, but then even though she's going into high school, she's younger than the other students because she has been skipped a grade. So it's a lot.
It's a lot. It's a
Teenage
lot, right? It's a lot. Yeah. Yeah.
years.
So that's it. I'm so happy to hear you talk about her. Like, she's familiar, like
Yes,
that was my goal, to just give
yes.
you a sense of who this woman was. So you felt like you knew her.
I felt like I knew her, in reading the book, and then, well, like I discovered, we actually knew of someone when I lived in Detroit, Linda, who's in the book. I actually met Linda when I lived up there, so we actually had like a 1 degree of separation. Me and your sister, imagine that. Um,
Imagine that. I love that so much. Actually.
Yes, I think that's beautiful. That's
Hmm.
beautiful. But in the book, as I say, you're talking about history and all of those things that are happening around, because, of course, she was born in the 40s. So there was everything that's happening in the 50s. I'm sorry, she was born
She
in the
was
50s.
born in 56, but yeah, that last half of the century, she went through all of it.
Right. So she had the chance to
Mhm.
experience everything that was happening, in terms of the civil rights movement and the Black Panther Party and just all of these different things that she had a chance to have a part of her journey, as
Mhm.
she is also dealing with her illness.
Yeah.
So not only just the whatever may have been happening within the family, but also dealing with all the other stuff that
In
was
the
happening
culture.
in the
Yeah.
culture.
Right. Like, because of her age, it meant that when she got to college, it was at the tail end of what they now call the Black campus movement, which
Mhm,
was really everywhere in the late 60s and early 70s. So she got to college in 72, right at the end of that, but she experienced it,
mhm,
and so that was her entree, her introduction to college. And
mhm.
then, of course, the 70s brought all the things they brought, including some great music.
Right.
And I always think about her in terms of her favorite artists. So that was another way that I conjured her to write the book. But it's also a cultural moment. Like,
Mhm.
I mean, to have Chaka Khan out there doing her thing,
Yes.
someone that she absolutely loved. Gladys Knight was at her height with these beautiful songs she was performing. It was just, she loved the Staple Singers.
Oh,
Okay,
yes.
there. Oh my goodness.
Yes.
And she introduced me to Tina Marie,
Yes.
and so I just feel that that is also something I wanted to evoke, what it was like to come of age in that time period. you
Mhm.
know yeah.
And I loved really watching the evolution of your relationship, because, as we've already talked about earlier on, maybe a little, yeah, because you were both young,
Yeah.
and whatever the tension may have been as you being the little baby sister. But then once you both were in Atlanta for a while, you at Spelman and her at Atlanta University, how that shifted your relationships in some ways, because you were able to draw closer during that time frame.
Yeah, those are special years. I call them the Atlanta years. They were only 2 years. And honestly, we weren't hanging out a lot either at that time, because imagine being a freshman in college and being in your first year of graduate school. You're in
Mhm,
different places in your life.
mhm,
But there were moments we came together, and those moments now are very special to me, you know.
mhm.
So we were working out our relationship in those early years when we were both in our early 20s. And then, honestly, Marcy, what happened is that our oldest sister, Deborah, died
Yes.
suddenly. I was a senior in college, and Rita was already out in the world working. And so when that happened, losing a sibling,
Yes.
we lost our father, and that was hard. But losing a sibling really shifted things between us. And she literally said to me, listen, we can't fight anymore. Let's just
Right.
not do it. Let's just not do it. And we never did again. And
Mm-hmm.
that was when we really became, I would say, true best friends as
Mm-hmm.
well as sisters. And
Yes.
I wanted to really explore that too, how a traumatic event can impact your relationship with your loved ones in profound ways.
Right. Right. Because I mean, and sometimes it draws people closer. Sometimes it causes people, especially if that person was the quote unquote glue,
Oh
oftentimes it
yeah.
may cause people to disperse. But
Hmm.
one thing, and there is, we're not going to tell the whole story because that, we don't do that here. But there is a lot of loss in the
Yeah,
family,
yeah,
with
for sure.
parents and siblings, and so I can imagine you do want to hold on to one another as you're starting to see some of the people that have been a part of your foundation. Now all of a sudden they're not there. But
Mhm.
you also, in the book, you don't shy away from the things that cause them to be in these situations,
No,
because there is substance abuse in the family, and there's volatile relationships in the family that have impacted, aren't necessarily that aren't positive in the long run, and
sure.
just dealing with all of that as well, while at the same time, in the case of Rita, she's actually dealing with her illness with all this other stuff that's going on around.
Right. Exactly. It's a lot, as you said.
It's
And
a
yet I feel as though there'll be something in this book for each person who reads it who can connect and relate, because we all go through so much.
right, right.
And so often, we don't see our lives reflected in that way. I've already had a few young women who actually suffer from lupus read the book,
Hmm.
and they've each said to me, it just feels good to be seen. And so that really means a lot to me.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I do want you to talk about that, because there's some people who know what it is and some people
Mhm.
who really don't understand what it is as much. So just,
Yeah.
without saying too much, just a little bit like your sister's journey with lupus, and kind of what that was for her.
Right. I didn't know as much about it, to be honest with you, as I could have. And I'm sure that there was a part of me that was afraid to learn more.
Yeah.
And so writing the book also gave me that opportunity to really understand what Rita went through. And so lupus is an autoimmune disease. It affects women disproportionately. Um, 90% of the autoimmune diseases out there are suffered by women. But
Hmm.
then when you look at lupus, it turns out that one in every 250 Black women has lupus.
Hmm.
And that's actually a lot, you
It
know.
is.
Yeah, and a lot of times they're not diagnosed properly, or they're misdiagnosed. It can look like other things. It can look like rheumatoid arthritis. It can look like MS. It can look like just something nebulous where the doctor will say, "Oh, you need to rest more," or get some exercise. Just like advice that is not helpful.
Right, right,
And
right.
lupus has this characteristic where the sufferer will have flare-ups, because in some ways the body's immune system is, in an effort to protect itself, attacking itself. And
Hmm.
so these flare-ups really create all kinds of symptoms. And some people have mild symptoms and some people have severe ones, or they vacillate between the two. It's I remember even with Rita, people didn't think it was that serious,
Hmm.
or they didn't understand because she looked healthy a lot of times.
Right.
But you know how you have friends who say they're tired, they feel the fatigue. In her
Hmm.
case, she'd have aches and pains, migraine headaches, sometimes fevers spiking out of nowhere. Those are things that are symptoms that can exacerbate the condition and
Hmm.
make it hard to work, make it hard to get around, sometimes make it hard to get up in the morning.
Hmm.
So I
Mhm.
really wanted to help people through the book to understand the complexity of the disease.
And it is very complex because there were times, as we mentioned earlier, she was still living life. I mean, she was working and, helping your mom and caring for, other family members and really kind of being, in many ways, she was the glue in the family in
Yeah.
many ways, doing all of these things while she was still, suffering and with
Mhm.
her health. And we, in the book, you get to see kind of the ups and downs and things like that she
Yeah.
experienced with that. And
Mhm.
also some of the choices that she made along the way because of her illness, and
Mhm.
like in not having children, making that decision that she wasn't
Right.
going to be a mom, for example.
Mhm.
And I thought about that. So I'm like, yes, it could have really been harmful to her. And
Mhm.
then if something happened and she passed away, then it's a child she's leaving behind. So
Mhm.
it impacted the way that she, dealt with her relationships, even though she didn't shy away from relationships. It
Right.
just impacted how far she went with those relationships.
Yeah, I mean, it really impacted her whole life. It really did. And I don't know. Sometimes I really believe it speaks to how a lot of Black women move through the world, even those who don't have chronic illnesses or
Mhm.
don't have ones that are named. You know,
Right.
it's like we just keep pushing through. We just
Mhm.
keep pushing through, and that was her whole attitude. She just wanted to keep moving forward, but it
Mhm.
takes its toll.
Right.
It takes its toll. And so that's the thing that I wanted to express too, that so often, there's this term I use in the book called weathering that was
Yes.
coined by this Dr. Arlene Geronimus. And she coined it 40 something a long time ago, but it's only now become more more you hear it more now. And she basically said, people from marginalized groups, very often a lot of Black people in particular, are always weathering through systemic racism's
Mhm.
effects on their lives. But when you
Mhm.
weather through something, ultimately it weathers you,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And suddenly you've got these chronic conditions and you don't know why. And the
Mhm.
healthcare, industry is telling you it's because you're not taking care of yourself,
Right.
when it's not that at all. You
Right.
know, it's all that toxic stress that lives in the body that's starting to manifest in
Mhm.
physical ailments. So that's the other thing I wanted to really highlight, that I feel her life was shortened in a lot of ways by the unnecessary societal pressures and discrimination and racist practices that she had to confront, that all of us do as we
Yes.
go through the world.
Yes. I mean, starting in her, getting her first real job and the things that she dealt with at that job with
Mhm.
in Chattanooga, Tennessee, which I'm like, ooh, it's right up the street from Atlanta, but
Yeah.
yes,
Yes.
it's a different world in Chattanooga. I'm sure it still is.
Yes, and certainly in 1980.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes. But to
yeah,
think, to be one of the only, if not the only, Black person in a space where people are openly racist and don't have a problem with it, and you become a target.
mm,
How many of us have dealt with that? And
right,
maybe not in the exact same way, but there are those microaggressions, or I just say aggressions. Because
yeah.
yeah.
Because it's not micro for the body.
Right. It's not micro for the body, but
Mm,
that, and then, I'm thinking there are several things in later years, because you talk about the redlining and how
mhm,
we weren't able to purchase homes, and sometimes the games that the landlords or the property owners would play with us as Black people because they knew that we really couldn't own anything, and things
mhm.
like that, and just the
Yeah,
stress.
it's stressful. This white home seller, the man Rita bought her house from, he tried to snatch the house back
Hmm.
through this really dubious practice. He had gotten away with it. He had gotten away with it before, and he thought he could do so with her, but he didn't know who he was dealing with.
Right.
She
Right.
was like, "Oh, that's not happening. That is not happening." But
Right.
it's a fight. Should you have to fight like that?
Right. There are so many things, and people don't think about it because I think we do get to a space where we're just kind of powering through and not really realizing the impact on it and
Yeah.
on us. So that is one of the things I could really appreciate about the way that you tell this story, Bridgett, because you're talking about your family. And yes, as I said, Rita is like the central person, but there are parts where you talk about your other siblings and your parents as well, and the things that they were weathering, and the
Exactly.
things that, created issues or challenges for them as well. But in doing that, it does give us, pause to think about, okay, if these things are happening around us, and you ask the questions like, why this person, why did this have to happen, things like that. It is food for thought, even for those of us in reading the book in our own families or our own situations.
Yeah. And I always really hoped and trusted that people would do just that. They would see parts of their own family, parts of their own lives, and then you don't feel so alone. You don't feel as though there's something wrong in particular with your family. Sometimes we think, oh, my family's so dysfunctional. No, all families are. And
Right.
sometimes it's just the way it is. But other times, I think with Black families, we always have that added layer of stress that's caused by, the society we live in. And we deserve to acknowledge that and not self-blame.
Right. Not self-blame.
Yeah.
And also having compassion for
Mm.
people when we see people going through certain things. Because as I mentioned earlier, like someone who's going through drug abuse, for whatever the reason might be. Usually there's a reason. Usually there's something that's going on behind that's leading that person to that space. It's not necessarily a thing where they just, I just want to get out here and party and abuse drugs. That's not necessarily the case. And also looking at your family and the timeline, because as we're saying, we're talking like the 50s up through, early 2000s. A lot of things that are available to us now weren't available.
Exactly. Yeah. And I just believe that there's always, a context around which people live their lives and make choices. And these things like drug use that have been so stigmatized, I'm doing research and looking at just really the whole foundation of the, war against drugs. And all of it is rooted in racism.
Yes.
And so you can't separate that from the fact that, a loved one is using drugs. Like it's all related. And so in my mind, it really helps to bring people's dignity back when you give them when you share the context of their lives. I feel as though that's a way to return their dignity to them.
Right.
And
to point out the fact that, in reality, we are treated differently, whether it's, going to the doctor to try to get pain medication or whatever the case may be, or you go in and the first thing they say, well, you just need to lose weight. Like your sister was told that many times. And, you talk about some other people who experience something similar, where it's like, oh, well, you're just doing this, or you need to change this, or you need to change that. But if someone else came in with that same issue, they would be treated differently.
Exactly. So, that's some implicit bias. And in my belief is that it's not implicit bias. It's pretty explicit.
Right.
And it should, if it's implicit, then it suggests that it's just the way it is. Right. And that's not acceptable.
Right.
So yeah, I was tackling a lot.
You did tackle a lot. You did tackle a lot in here. And as we're not even discussing the half of it, because, the point is for you to read the book and really to think about these things. And because for me, it did make me think about, health and well-being and, being an advocate. Because like your sister, I'm single with no children. So like thinking about what would it be? Who would be the advocate for me? And see, I don't have siblings. So having to think about how I will navigate that.
Right. So, and these are important issues for us to think about in advance, right?
In advance. Like what would I do in certain instances? Because there were things that she did do to align herself or set herself up that would help her in some ways, but then she still couldn't do it all.
No.
So, but to think about that, a lot of times we don't want to think about, if we were to get sick or as we age or whatever, and or even leaving here. We don't often think about that, but in reading this book, it caused me to really think about some of those things again. And also just really diving into the fact that we really do need to learn or understand the importance of advocating for ourselves, and
Absolutely.
getting second opinions if it's a health issue, and all of these sorts of things.
And also I wanted to show that Rita did build a community around her, and I want that to be a takeaway as well. She had a church community. She had some good friends in her life. She had her family. She had relatives. She was someone who nurtured relationships. So my Uncle John, for instance, at one point stepped up, and he was the new father figure in her life, taking her to doctor's appointments, checking in on her, etc. It's like she invested in all those relationships, and then she was able to draw from this community around her to help. It didn't necessarily save her in the end, but
Right.
it really, to me, speaks to the importance of appreciating community. Even in
Community.
the apartment building where she lived her last years of her life is this famous, kind of locally famous apartment complex in Detroit, the Riverfront. And Rosa Parks lived out her last years there, some other, Aretha Franklin, others. But she treated it like a community where she's like, I have neighbors now, and I have people who I care about. She used to check on a guy who was paralyzed and in a wheelchair. And so that was her thing. When she felt good, she was down there helping him. And those are takeaway lessons. Even for myself, even today, I still am reminded of the way she lived her life. Like
Yeah.
she nurtured the people, her relationships.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
think that's so critical. I really do.
Well, I want you personally, because I just want you to share a little bit with us, because in writing this book and writing the two books now and talking about your family stories, and as we've mentioned, there is loss. And in terms of your, I should say, nuclear family, it's you.
Yes.
And
That's
so just for you, for someone who might find themselves in a similar space, just anything that you think would be beneficial for them to do for their own self-care and their own wellness, and as we talked about at the beginning, working through grief and all of those sorts of things, because I know that that's a big part of how you continue to live and thrive and survive and find joy in this space, and be able
Yeah.
to tell these stories.
I mean, it's such a beautiful question, and there are so many ways I could answer it, because decades have passed, and I feel I went through phases when it was hard, and then other times when I was able to reach out and get help, either from a good friend, from therapist. I definitely believe in therapy. And sometimes, in my case, luckily I found a life partner who really has been like a rock and helped me across the time we've been together to sort of, get through these tougher points. Someone who understood that I had sadness and I had loss and I needed to work through it. And you need to work through the loss of loved ones one at a time.
Yes.
That's how it is. It's like you're going to miss one person for a given reason at a given time, and then the next thing you know, you're thinking about another one that's no longer here, and you need that space and you need that time. I think I will say that what has helped me the most is that I'm always believing that my loved ones wanted me happy,
Yes.
and that a tribute to their lives is to live mine fully and to thrive. That's a
Yeah.
goal. That's a goal for me. I feel as though they're all cheering me on,
Yes.
you know?
I know that they are, because by you, what should I say, navigating whatever your thoughts and feelings and emotions are about all of this, and being able to share it with the world and put these books out here, you're keeping them alive. You're keeping their memory memories alive. And as you said, you're giving them humanity in spaces where maybe sometimes people might not want to recognize that humanity.
Mm-hmm.
You're helping those of us who, are navigating these sorts of things to understand, or as I said, the questions to think about of how we are going to move forward and care
Yeah.
for ourselves and care for those around us and
Mm-hmm.
things like that. So, I mean, you're doing, as they would say, you're doing the Lord's work.
Well, you know what? It's an honor, and that, I want everything you said. I want that to be true, because then it really does make me feel like their lives mattered.
Yes,
You know.
they definitely did. And I feel that way even when I come in, I have conversations like this because, yeah, my daddy liked to play his numbers, but my daddy was an avid reader. So, and I wasn't doing this when he was still here. So I know he
Wow.
watches and he would be like, oh, yeah, that's a good book, or, whatever the case may be. I'm sure if we were able to have these conversations, that he would be, delighted that I'm doing this and
Sure.
having these sorts of conversations.
And there's probably a part of you that was deeply influenced by him, and that may be
Absolutely.
why you're doing this. So he
Absolutely.
lives on through this, through what
Absolutely.
you're doing right now.
Absolutely. Well, I do want to say I like the way that you ended the book, where you do
Mhm.
kind of say if Rita was here, how
Mhm.
she would feel about the things that are happening in the world around us. So that
Yeah.
brings her into now, even
Yeah,
though she's not physically here to experience these things, but how she would respond to
I
what's
do.
going
Yeah, that was fun to write, because she was actually excited about the 21st century.
on.
She was
Okay.
looking forward to it,
Hmm.
and so that gave me an opportunity to think how she would have navigated it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I love, like she said, she loved to talk on the phone. So yeah, she would love a good cell phone where you don't have to pay for long.
She would have loved that. She would have loved that. Trust me.
And Skyping and all that kind of stuff. That she would have
Yeah.
loved that.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Bridgett.
No,
I
thank you.
appreciate you again. And for someone who asked earlier, I will make sure I share the link to our conversation that we had when we talked about the world according to Fannie Davis. But I would be remiss if I did not bring your film back up, Naked Acts,
Yes.
because it's getting a lot of play again in the re-release. So
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about what's going on with that and where people
Yeah.
can
So I
find.
made this film in the 90s, and it's called Naked Acts, and it's a feature film about a Black actress who, when you meet her, has lost a lot of weight and wants to really succeed as an actress, but she's asked to do a nude scene. So you're watching her trying to keep her clothes on, but also keep her part. And so things
Mm.
happen that work out and don't work out.
I love.
The film got rediscovered. Literally, it was in an archive, and a young woman discovered it and took it to a distributor, and voila, it's back out. It's now it's streaming on different platforms, including Apple and Prime Video, and now it's actually available on DVD and Blu-ray.
All right, so I wanted to put the name up there so y'all will see it. Look for
Yeah.
Naked Acts, because
Yes.
I'm definitely going to go and watch it and then report back.
Please do.
So of course I know that your book hasn't been out in the world that long, so you still
Yeah.
like doing events and things like that. Are
Yeah.
there any places or spaces that you may be within the next few weeks, Bridgett, where people can come out and see you and
Oh, absolutely. I'm very excited that I'm headed to Detroit, my hometown. And so I'll be doing two events there. I'm going to be doing one on the 22nd of March at this lovely bookstore, 27th Letter Books. And then I'm going to be the next day at the Detroit Public Library.
yeah.
I'm very excited about that on the 23rd of March. So that's thrilling, because it's my home, and
Mhm.
it's Rita's home.
Yes.
And so I know that a lot of people who knew and loved her will be there. And that's
Mhm.
exciting to think about, right? And
Yeah,
on my website, there's a whole breakdown of the entire tour. So if people go to the website, they can see all the events. I'm going to be in like 5 or 6 cities. So
yes, including the city of your alma mater, Spelman,
yes,
Atlanta.
including Atlanta on
That
April
stuff.
9th. So
So
yeah.
yes, everybody, please check that out and grab a copy of Love, Rita. Oh, I keep saying one last thing, girl, forgive me. Because this book is available on audio and you actually do the reading.
I
So
do.
how was that? Because I mean, you've written it and now
Yeah.
you're reading it. So what was that process?
Yeah, I did the audiobook for The World According to Fannie Davis, so I had a little experience, but
Okay.
I will say it's a lot of work and it's intense because you do it across several days, 8 hours a day, but beautiful. It was so great to have the opportunity to know that when you listen to the book, you'll be listening to me.
Yes, and
Yeah.
yes, it definitely makes it feel more real and more personal because it
Yeah.
is the actual author. So I
Yeah.
love that. So
Yeah.
thank you again, Bridgett, for being here. I look forward to, I don't know what you've got coming next, but I'm not even going to, we got to,
Who knows?
we'll do this first and get this out
Okay.
there in the world, make sure everybody knows and
Yeah.
grabs copies of it. And there is a Brown Girl Collective bookstore, which is affiliated with Bookshop. If you go, just type that in just like it is, Brown Girl Collective Bookstore, and you will find Love Rita there as well. And so please check that out, or wherever you want to purchase, or libraries, because libraries are important as well. And we need to use them, especially since we know what's happening where people are
Yes, we
trying to
do.
make them not as important. So wherever you can get a hold to it, absorb what she's talking about and reach out, leave your reviews. All those sorts of things are just so important. So please do that and support Bridgett and her work. So I'm going to let you grab some water. And I will
Thank you.
for being here.
No, thank you so much. It was a pleasure. I really enjoyed it.
Yes, thank you. All right, so that was a great conversation. The second one, as promised, I will share the first one from a few years ago so everybody can see that first conversation that we had. So thank you so much for being here and being a part of the conversation. Please grab a copy of the book, share it out, let others know about Love Rita, because it's just such a good book. It's such a well-written family story. It's a real story. It talks about history. It talks about all the things that were happening in Rita's life during the time that she was here, and just the ways that she navigated and lived her best life for 44 years. So thank you, and please pick up a copy of that. Now for next week, we are actually going in a different direction. We're going to talk about romance next week, okay? Our special guest will be Christina Forrest to talk about her latest release, The Love Lyrics. So actually some love this week, some love next week as well, but just this is a fictional love story by Christina Forrest, her latest release. So please join me for that next week. And in the meantime, in between time, please take good care of yourselves, and we'll see you again real soon. All right, take care. Bye-bye.